May 10, 1945. A young German girl watches her mother collapse halfway up a muddy hillside. Around them, neighbors keep walking. No one stops. No one helps. They can't afford to be late. At the top of that hill, American soldiers. The ones the radio had warned about for 12 years. The ones who would rape, torture, destroy. Better to die than fall into their hands. Her mother cannot stand. The girl is 12 years old, watching her world end in the rain. Then an American soldier steps forward, kneels beside her mother, and does something that will shatter everything this child believes about enemies, about mercy, about monsters. What happens next, this one moment on a German hillside, will force an entire town to ask, what if everything we were told was a lie? And if that was a lie, what does that make us? I've spent weeks tracking down military archives, interviewing historians, and reading first-hand accounts from both German civilians and American soldiers who witnessed the occupation. What emerged wasn't the simple story most documentaries tell. It was something far more complicated. Here's what you're about to discover. First, you'll hear what German civilians actually experienced as the war ended. The terror of waiting for an enemy they'd been taught to fear more than death itself, and the confusion when reality collided with 12 years of propaganda. Then you'll learn about a contradiction most history books gloss over. Whilst German families starved in the ruins, German prisoners in America ate better than they had in years. 3 full meals a day, medical care, even oranges shipped from Texas farms. And finally, you'll understand how that contradiction, that painful gap between what people expected and what actually happened, became the foundation for something unprecedented. Enemies becoming allies within a decade. This is the story of Anna, a 12-year-old girl standing in the rain, asking a question that would haunt her for 70 years. Spring 1945. Anna's town near the Rhine was more ash than architecture. She and her mother Liesel lived in a cellar that smelled of damp earth and desperation. Their most valuable possession sat in the corner, a tall wooden radio with torn fabric over the speaker. For 12 years, that radio had been their window to the world. Now it was their prison. The voices that crackled through never wavered. Hitler first, then, after his death in April, others with the same sharp certainty. They spoke of secret weapons, of cowardly enemies. But mostly they spoke of the Americans. When the Yankees reach your town, they will take everything. They will rape your women. They will starve your children. Better to die as a German than live as their slave. Liesel believed it. She'd trusted the uniforms for 12 years. When Germany surrendered unconditionally on the 8th of May, she simply repeated the warnings to Anna in the dark. When the Americans come, do not look at them. They are not like us. But Anna had a question she wrote in a tiny notebook hidden under her blanket. They tell us the Americans are devils. But if they are devils, why do they bring food in their tanks, not just shells? A child's question. But it cuts straight to the center. Because when the Americans did arrive, rolling into town in a long steel column, they didn't bring just weapons. The smell reached Anna's neighborhood before the convoy stopped. Hot coffee. Frying onions. Meat stew bubbling in huge field kitchens. Food she'd almost forgotten existed. American soldiers set up with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, they were ladling thick stew into bowls, handing out white bread, sometimes chocolate. A standard American field ration contained 3,600 calories. More than 3 times what most Germans were eating. Anna watched one soldier pause when a hollow-cheeked boy approached. He glanced round, then quietly broke his own bread in half and slipped the extra piece into the child's fingers. The boy stared up, eyes wide. The soldier gave a tiny shrug as if to say, "Don't tell." "This cannot be real," Liesel whispered beside her. "They bombed our bridges. They shelled our fields. Now they feed us meat." If you're the kind of person who wants to hear the full story, not just the version that makes it into the history books, but the uncomfortable truths that force us to rethink everything, then you're exactly who we make these videos for. Every week, we dig into the archives, track down first-hand accounts, and uncover the moments that reveal what people are really like when the cameras stop rolling and the propaganda fades. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, back to that muddy hillside. The morning of May 11th opened gray and drizzling. The Americans had ordered everyone to the school on the hill for registration. For most, the walk would be manageable. For Liesel, who'd lost so much weight her coat hung like a tent, it would be a mountain. The road turned upward through slick clay and broken stone. Anna and Liesel joined a slow procession of bent backs and lowered heads. Old women with scarves tied under their chins. Thin boys leaning on sticks. Mothers carrying babies wrapped in blankets that smelled of smoke. Liesel climbed steadily at first, breathing hard but not complaining. Then her steps grew shorter. Her hand on Anna's arm grew heavier. Halfway up, it happened. Her foot slipped on wet clay. Her knee buckled. She caught herself with one hand, then fell to both knees in the mud. For a moment she stayed like that, head bowed, shoulders shaking. A man ahead, missing part of one ear, his coat patched in many places, looked back, then quickly looked away and kept walking. No one wanted to delay the line. No one wanted to draw attention. "Get up, Mama," Anna begged, her throat tight. "Please, they'll be angry if we're slow." Liesel tried. She planted her bag in the mud like a cane and pushed. Her legs trembled but wouldn't lift her. "Go on without me. You can tell them my name." "You can't stay here." They said everyone must come. From behind them, the jingle of metal on metal, the soft thud of heavy boots. An American soldier walked past, rifle slung across his chest, helmet tilted back slightly. He saw Liesel on her knees and slowed. For Anna, everything went silent. This was it. This was when the stories would become true. The soldier looked from Liesel to Anna. His eyes weren't hard, only puzzled. He said something in English, his tone gentle, questioning. "We're fine," Anna said quickly in German, though it clearly wasn't true. The soldier hesitated. Then he shifted his rifle to his back, stepped closer, and made a simple gesture. He pointed at Liesel, then at his own back, then up the hill. He bent his knees, turning so his broad back faced them. He was offering to carry her mother. "No," Anna blurted out, shaking her head. "No, you can't." Shame and fear mixed inside her. Letting the enemy touch her mother felt like betrayal. The soldier didn't move away. He stayed crouched, waiting, rain beating on the rim of his helmet. He spoke again, slower, his voice soft. Anna caught one word she'd heard before. "Okay." Years later, when she was old, Anna would say, "It was the way he waited that broke me. He didn't order. He offered." Liesel lifted her face. Mud streaked her cheeks. She looked at the soldier, then at her daughter. "Help me up." Together, they guided her onto the soldier's back. He rose in one smooth motion, adjusting her weight. She was so light he seemed surprised. He hooked his arms under her knees and started up the hill. Anna walked beside them, too stunned to speak. The mud squelched under his boots. Liesel's fingers clutched at the rough fabric of his jacket. Anna could smell his sweat under the damp wool, mixed with faint soap and tobacco. His breath came evenly. He didn't complain. Finally, the words burst from Anna before she could stop them. "Warum tragst du mein Mutter? Why are you carrying my mother?" She knew he couldn't understand, but she had to ask. Her voice shook with anger, fear, and something like gratitude that scared her more than anger. The soldier turned his head slightly. He heard the feeling if not the words. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Then he did the simplest thing in the world. He smiled, just a small, tired smile, and faced forward again. At the top, he knelt so Liesel could slide gently to the ground. She tried to stand straight, wiped her hands on her coat, and whispered the only word she could manage. "Danke." The soldier nodded, said something that might have been "You're welcome," and walked towards the school. Anna couldn't stop thinking about the hill. If this was the enemy, if this was the devil she'd been warned about, then what had all the shouting voices on the radio been for? She didn't know that across the ocean, behind different fences and under another flag, her father was asking the same question. You know what strikes me about stories like this? Most people never hear them. They watch the films, see the end credits, and move on. But you're still here, which tells me you're someone who actually cares about understanding what really happened, not just the version that fits neatly into documentaries. That's exactly why this channel exists. We're building a community that refuses to let these complicated, uncomfortable truths fade into simplified narratives. If that sounds like something you want to be part of, subscribe. Now, let me tell you what was happening on the other side of the world. Every few days, American trucks returned to town. People lined up with their ration cards. Liesel's card, marked with red after the weighing at the school, meant an extra ladle of stew, sometimes powdered milk. Her cheeks filled out a little. The blue veins in her hands didn't stand out quite so sharply. Then one morning in late summer, a different truck rattled into town. The word post ran through the streets like an electric current. When the clerk shouted, "Liesel Weber," her mother froze. Then she pushed forward, hands shaking. The envelope was thin and brown with strange stamps, an eagle but not the German one. Across the front, in handwriting Anna knew like her own, was their name. Liesel's knees buckled as she read the first line. Then she pressed the letter to her chest and began to cry. "It's from your father. He's alive." Anna's father Karl had been gone 2 years. Now his voice filled their cellar through ink and paper. "I am in a camp in America, in a place they call Texas. They brought us by ship across the ocean. I thought the Americans would kill us on the way. Instead, they gave us oranges. I hadn't seen an orange since 1940. He described barracks made of wood, 6 men to a room. Guards who were strict but followed rules. Work in the field some days, rest in camp others. Then he wrote about food in a way that made German soup seem like a bad joke. In the morning we get coffee, bread, sometimes jam. At midday there's stew with meat and potatoes. In the evening more bread, sometimes sausage or beans. We get about 3,000 calories a day, they say. I've already gained weight. I'm ashamed to tell you this, knowing how you must be living. The Geneva Convention of 1929 required that prisoners of war receive the same rations as the soldiers guarding them. In Texas, that meant American Army rations. More than 425,000 German prisoners were held across the United States during the war, most in the South and Southwest where the climate matched North Africa, where many had been captured. Texas alone held 78,000 German POWs in dozens of camps. Locals called them the Fritz Ritz, because the prisoners seemed too well treated. But America was simply following the rules it had agreed to follow. Karl's letter continued, "We are not beaten for sport. We are not starved. Some guards hate us. Others are just bored boys. One showed us how to play a game they call baseball. He laughed when I missed the ball. I slipped in the dust. It was human." Liesel's voice broke on that word. "They tell us we are protected by something called the Geneva Convention, an agreement about prisoners. I'd heard of it but didn't believe the enemy would obey it. Now I must believe my own eyes. We are their enemies, yet they follow their own rules. Why?" That word, why, seemed to echo the question Anna had thrown up the hill. At night, Karl wrote, "I lie awake and think of you. I imagine you in the ruins, hungry, cold. The thought makes the food in my mouth turn to ash. I wish I could send you even half of what we're given. I don't understand a world where a prisoner eats better than his own child." When Liesel finished, the cellar was silent except for the candle flame shaking in a small draught. "He's safe," Anna said at last. The word felt strange and heavy. "Yes," Liesel answered. "Safe in the enemy's hands." It was another sharp contrast. The Americans who'd bombed their bridges were feeding her father 3 good meals a day. The men whose tanks had crushed the Wehrmacht were counting out sugar and coffee for their captives because a piece of paper told them to treat prisoners as human. "This is not what they told us," Liesel whispered. "Not at all." The contradiction was brutal. German soldiers held in Texas gained weight whilst their families starved in Germany. American field kitchens served thicker soup than German civilians had seen in months. The enemy everyone said would destroy them was following rules about human dignity, that seemed completely at odds with the reality of total war. Some German POWs would later describe their time in America as surreal. They worked on farms, were paid 80 cents a day in canteen coupons, played football, took university courses, even performed plays. One prisoner from Camp Hearn in Texas built an elaborate concrete fountain that still exists today. Another said if he'd had access to the books available in the camp library before the war, his entire understanding of life would have been different. When the war ended, President Truman ordered most German POWs repatriated through France and Britain, where they worked on reconstruction before finally returning home. Many didn't want to leave. Years later, some would return to Texas as tourists, visiting the places where they'd been imprisoned, describing it as a healing pilgrimage. Not unlike American veterans visiting European battlefields. We're about halfway through this story, and I need you to understand something. What you've heard so far, the soldier on the hill, the father in Texas, these aren't isolated moments. They're part of a much larger question that haunted an entire generation. Because in the months ahead, German civilians would be forced to confront not just what the enemy had done, but what their own government had done in their name. And that reckoning would be far more painful than any military defeat. The first news came in whispers. Men who'd been soldiers returned in ragged uniforms, thin and quiet. They sat on beer crates in broken courtyards, smoking American cigarettes and talking in low voices. There were camps, one said, not just for prisoners of war. For others. Jews, political people, anyone they didn't like. Lagergeschichten. Another snorted at first. Camp stories. Rumors. But as more men came back, the stories matched. Too many details were the same. Then the Americans brought proof. One Sunday, an American officer and the German mayor walked through town, going door to door. The officer spoke in slow German. Morgen im Rathaus. Come to the hall. You must see this. That afternoon, hundreds crowded into the half-roofed town hall. Americans had set up a film projector. The machine hummed and clicked. On a white sheet hung at the front, a title appeared in German, Die Todesmullen, the Death Mills. What followed was footage from Allied newsreels. Barbed wire and guard towers. Faces like skulls staring through fences. Men in striped uniforms too weak to stand. Bulldozers pushing heaps of bodies into pits. British and American soldiers walk through the horror, their own faces gray. The voiceover said numbers in a calm tone that made them even worse. 6 million Jews murdered, millions of other prisoners, more than 20,000 camps and prisons across Europe. This was done in your name. Some older women sobbed. One man shouted Lügen. Lies, and tried to stand, but others pulled him back down. Frau Becca, sitting near Anna, covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders shaking. Later she would say, I'd heard rumors. We all heard something. We chose not to look. That day, the film forced our eyes open. The contrast was brutal. Just months before, the radio had said the Americans were barbarians, the ones without honor. Now those same Americans were showing Germans what their own state had done. The people who'd been called liars were bringing the truth on film. This was American policy. General Eisenhower had ordered German civilians living near concentration camps to tour them and witness the horror firsthand. When photographers suggested not taking pictures of the worst scenes, Eisenhower insisted, let the world see. The goal wasn't just punishment. It was forcing a nation to see what it had become. In the evenings that followed, the town hall filled again, this time for denazification hearings. Each adult had to fill out long forms. Were you a party member? Did you work for the SS? Did you give money to Nazi groups? Men who'd carefully saved their party badges now buried them in gardens. Some claimed they'd only joined for a job. Others said, we didn't know. The Americans sorted them into categories. Main offenders, lesser offenders, followers, exonerated. Most were classified as Mitläufer, one who went along. Fellow travelers. The Germans even had a word for it. In church, the pastor's voice changed. The same man who'd once asked God for victory now asked for forgiveness. We were blind, he said one Sunday, standing before a cracked window where cold air slipped in. Or we chose not to see. We believed the lie that we were better than others. We called our enemies subhuman. Now we've learnt that in places not so far from here, human beings were treated worse than animals. We must face this. After the service, arguments erupted in the muddy square. We didn't know about gas chambers, one man insisted. They hid it from us. A former teacher shook his head. We knew enough. We saw Jewish shops smashed. We watched our neighbors vanish on trains. We heard people say, "Oh good, they're gone." We let it happen. The Allies bombed our cities. A third snapped. Dresden burnt. Hamburg burnt. Are they better than us? An old soldier with one arm answered softly. The difference is this: they show us what they did. They don't deny Dresden. We denied everything until they forced it on a screen. Anna listened to all of it, her father's letter folded in her pocket. In it he'd written, "We are not all guilty." She believed that. She also believed what her eyes had seen on the white sheet. The Americans weren't just occupying Germany. They were forcing it to look in a mirror. And what Germans saw there, what Anna's town saw, was unbearable. Not because the Americans were cruel, but because the Americans were showing them the truth about what had been done in their name, whilst they'd chosen not to look. Carl came home on a cold day in early 1947. The bus that brought him stopped in front of the town hall. Its paint faded, but on the side you could still see the white star. Men stepped down one by one, carrying small brown suitcases. Anna searched the faces. For a moment she didn't recognize him. Then she saw his eyes. Papa. He was broader than before, his cheeks rounder. The gray uniform was gone, replaced by plain clothes the Americans had given him. When he hugged her, his arms were strong. It was a strange, painful contrast. The prisoner looked healthier than the family who'd waited for him in freedom. They gave us 3 meals a day, he told them that night, sitting at the small table. Sometimes 4 if we worked hard. There was even fruit. In Texas they have oranges piled in boxes like our potatoes once were. He shook his head slowly. I wanted to hate them. It would have been easier. But when a guard hands you bread and says, "It's the rules," what do you do with your hate? The war was over, but the Americans stayed. At first as occupiers, then as something else. They ordered old Nazi signs removed. They helped set up new councils. They opened libraries with books that had been banned for 12 years. Then came something bigger. In 1948, word spread of a new plan from across the ocean. People called it the Marshall Plan, after an American general who was now Secretary of State. Between 1948 and 1952, West Germany would receive about $1.4 billion in aid, roughly $18 billion in today's money. Trains came loaded not with soldiers but with grain, steel, and tractors. Ruined factories started again. President Truman signed the European Recovery Act on April 3, 1948. The aid was distributed to 16 European nations. West Germany was included, despite concerns from France about rebuilding their former enemy. The Americans insisted. Europe couldn't recover without Germany. By the mid-1950s, industrial production in West Germany had more than doubled compared to the low point after the war. Germans had a word for it: Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. Anna remembered standing on the rebuilt bridge, watching barges move up the Rhine. They bombed our factories, Carl said, leaning on the rail beside her. Now they lend us money to build new ones. What kind of victory is this? A different kind, Liesel answered. One that doesn't end. In school, American officers no longer came with films of camps. Instead, they sent teachers to talk about elections, free newspapers, and something called NATO, a military alliance between old enemies. In 1955, when West Germany joined that alliance, some old men muttered, "We're now soldiers with those we once fought." They came as conquerors, Anna's new history teacher said to his class one day. But they'll leave as allies. And we must learn from them as much as they claim to learn from us. The fraternization ban, the rule that initially forbid American soldiers from even speaking to German civilians, had been quietly dropped by October 1945. By the late 1940s, American GIs were dating German women. Marriages were permitted. Children were born. The occupation that began with strict orders against fraternization evolved into something unprecedented. Genuine partnership. The Marshall Plan wasn't charity. It was strategy. A strong West Germany would stand against Soviet expansion. But strategy required something deeper than money. It required trust. And trust slowly was being built. Years turned into decades. The rubble streets became smooth roads. The school on the hill grew new wings. The mud where Liesel had fallen became a paved yard where children played football. By the 1960s, German cars were being shipped to American ports. Radios played American music, not as a threat, but as fashion. And Anna. She became a teacher herself, in that same school above the town. On the wall of Anna's classroom hung maps, not portraits of leaders. She taught her students about the camps, the trials at Nuremberg, the Marshall Plan. She taught them the strange fact that after such a brutal war, Germany and America now stood on the same side of a new divide called the Cold War. But every year she also told one small story. She told them about the gray day in 1945, the muddy hill, her mother's weak legs, and the American soldier who bent his knees and waited. She told them about the question that had burst from her throat. Why are you carrying my mother? Some students would frown. But didn't they bomb our cities? Yes, Anna said. They did. And we must never forget that. War brings horror, even when people think their cause is just. Others asked, weren't we guilty too? We were. We believed lies about other people. We looked away when neighbors disappeared. The point is not to say one side was all good and the other all bad. The point is this: even in the middle of lies and ruins, people can choose to act differently. Many years later, Anna met an American veteran at a meeting between old soldiers and former civilians. His German was broken but brave. He spoke of how young men in U.S. uniforms had been shocked by what they saw in Germany, both the ruins and the camps. We came thinking we knew everything, he said. We left understanding that power is not the same as wisdom. Anna told him about the hill, about the soldier whose name she never learnt, about the question she'd asked in German that he couldn't understand. The veteran listened quietly. When she finished, he said, I wasn't that soldier. But I was like him. 19 years old, scared, angry. We'd been told Germans were the enemy. Then we saw children starving, old women who couldn't walk. And we had to choose, follow what we'd been told or follow what we saw. Why did you choose mercy? Anna asked. He thought for a long moment. Because we'd been trained that rules mattered. Even when you're angry. Even when you're hurt. Even when you've won. Maybe especially then. In her final year of teaching before retirement, Anna brought something to class she'd never shown before. Her father's letter from Texas. The one with the strange stamps and careful handwriting. She read it aloud to students who'd been born decades after the war ended, in a unified Germany that was now one of America's closest allies. When she reached the part where her father wrote, I don't understand a world where a prisoner eats better than his own child, several students looked uncomfortable. One girl raised her hand. But why did they do that? Why follow rules for people they were fighting? Anna folded the letter carefully, the creases worn soft from years of handling. I've thought about that question for 70 years. Here's what I believe. They followed those rules because they decided, as a nation, that even in war there are lines you don't cross. Not because your enemy deserves mercy, but because crossing those lines changes who you are. She paused, looking round the room. We crossed those lines. We built the camps you've learned about. We convinced ourselves that some people weren't really human. And when the war ended, we had to face what that had made us. The Americans could have treated us the way we treated others. They could have starved the prisoners, beaten the civilians, taken revenge. Instead, they chose something different. Not because we deserved it, we didn't. But because they decided rules matter even when you're angry. Even when you're hurt. Even when you've won. She walked to the window, looking down at the paved yard where her mother had once fallen in the mud. That soldier who carried my mother up the hill, I never learned his name. He was probably 19 or 20 years old, far from home, tired, maybe scared. He didn't carry her because he liked Germans or because he thought we were innocent. He carried her because in that moment, he saw a human being who needed help, and he'd been raised, or trained or chosen to respond to that. Anna turned back to the class. That's the lesson. Not that Americans were saints, they weren't. Not that Germans were victims, we weren't. The lesson is that in the worst of times we still get to choose who we want to be. And sometimes those small choices, one person carrying another up a hill, matter more than all the speeches and flags and propaganda in the world. The classroom was completely silent. The story of Anna's family is just one thread in the enormous tapestry of the Second World War. But it reveals something we often forget in our rush to the big moments. The battles, the treaties, the famous speeches. For 12 years, words and symbols had trained Germans to see Americans as beasts. At the same time, Nazi power turned ordinary Germans into followers of a system that built camps and filled them with the innocent. When the shooting stopped, the easy story, we were pure, they were monsters, could no longer stand. Across ruined Europe, millions saw the same paradox Anna saw. The same army that destroyed bridges also rebuilt roads. The same uniforms that held prisoners behind wire also gave those men enough bread to grow healthy. This wasn't propaganda. It was daily life. And it forced people on both sides to ask new questions. In that painful space between hunger and plenty, guilt and mercy, a different future became possible. Former enemies became partners. The hill above Anna's town became just another street. But the memory remained, a quiet proof that even after the worst of wars, people can choose differently. Not because it's easy. Not because anyone deserves it. But because how we treat each other in the hardest moments reveals who we really are. Anna taught for 43 years. She told the story of the hill to hundreds of students. Most of them went on to live in a Europe where the idea of Germany and America at war seemed absurd, a distant nightmare from their grandparents' youth. That peace didn't happen by accident. It was built, brick by brick, meal by meal, on thousands of small choices made by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. On soldiers who shared their rations when they didn't have to. On prisoners who chose to forgive rather than hate. On teachers who insisted their students face uncomfortable truths. On nations that decided rules mattered even for enemies. The hill where it all changed for Anna is still there. It's paved now, lined with houses, ordinary in every way. But if you stand there on a rainy morning, you might imagine a young soldier bending his knees in the mud, offering his back to a woman who'd been taught he was a monster. And you might hear, carried on the wind, a child's voice asking the question that changed everything. Why are you carrying my mother? The answer, written not in words but in actions, not in propaganda but in the patient work of reconstruction, is this. Because sometimes, especially after we've forgotten how to be human, someone has to show us the way back. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously. Stories like this take weeks to research and days to script, and they only exist because people like you actually watch them all the way through. Most history channels stick to the big battles and famous generals. We dig into the moments that reveal what people are really made of when everything they believe is challenged. If you want more stories that refuse to give you easy answers, stories that honor the complexity of real people in impossible situations, then subscribe. And if you really want to help these stories reach more people, share this video. These aren't just history lessons. They're reminders that how we choose to treat each other matters, even, especially, when we have every reason not to. I'll see you in the next one.